This is a video response to Ernest's Nietzsche and Mind blog. Um, he spoke about Nietzsche's idea that the intellect cannot criticize itself, that consciousness cannot understand itself, and I agree with that totally. So consciousness to want to know itself, it has to almost step outside of itself. And for me, it seems like consciousness is already a stepping outside of itself, or at least stepping outside of the body or the unconscious mind, say. So to take another step back, you're really you're standing on a wobbly structure there, because you have to make first the assumption of consciousness at the first level, and then consciousness trying to understand itself again. Well, that's based on this level being right, and each level you go up, it's getting more and more shaky, and because you're making all of these deductions that are taking you back into, eventually it just becomes meaningless. But what I really wanted to try to talk about was this distinction between consciousness and unconsciousness, because I mean, maybe Nietzsche is only making that distinction to criticize the typical view of this matter, but where do you really draw the line between the two? And to say that the subconscious or the unconscious is what really causes us to do things, and that it's motivated only by the desire to survive, to have power over, and to control things. I kind of disagree with that. I think those are conscious projections onto the unconscious, because the way I see it, consciousness is the level that wants to control and have power over the world. At the subconscious level, I don't think organisms really feel separate from the world. I mean, granted, if you look at lower animals like reptiles and whatnot, they seem pretty vicious and pretty. It seems like their whole livelihood is based on survival and finding and killing food and whatnot. But still, for us to view them that way, like we don't really know what's going on inside. And I think for lower forms of life like that, they are just so embedded in the world, in their inner state of experience, that for them there's no such thing as having power. They don't have power. They're just as willing to eat their prey as they are to be eaten by their predator. So they're immersed in this ecosystem where they don't have this notion of gaining power and control over anything. That is consciousness projecting onto the unconscious. So you spoke about Daniel Dennett, and I think the book you referred to was Freedom Evolves, possibly, and that experiment that sort of showed that our feeling of free will is this projection of grammar that doesn't really exist. It was an experiment called the Lebet experiment by Benjamin Lebet, and it was an EEG experiment where he was monitoring these subjects with an EEG, and watching a clock dial go around, and they had to tell the experimenter when they first had the thought to push the button, and then when they pushed the button itself was recorded. So after they push the button, they tell the experimenter how soon before they push the button they actually had the desire to have that motor reaction, and they compare this to the EEG, and what they found was prior to the subject's reported inner experience of deciding to push the button, the brain had already started working in the motor cortex to push the button. So the decision had already been made, and consciousness then becomes aware of it, and then we push the button. So yeah, that seems to get rid of this notion of free will. Or it maybe just shows that consciousness and unconsciousness aren't really that separate. Consciousness does seem to be this disembodied thing, and it does, as you said, it just watches what happens. It doesn't decide. It just is aware. It's the part of us that is aware of what happens. You spoke a little bit about math and whether that gives us some um, um, objective knowledge about the world. And it made me think of what Carl Jung, psychologist, said about math, and his notion of the collective unconscious being this collection of archetypes that all of humanity has access to. Um, comes into play here because he said that math was this archetype that was unconscious until, say, um, Pythagoras, or even probably before him, and the Babylonians. Whoever the first humans were to really start to develop mathematics, what they did was pull this unconscious archetype out of the collective unconscious and into consciousness by stabilizing um, a mathematical system into digits and numerals and a linguistic form of some kind, and that's what made it conscious, because then we can manipulate these forms that hold this unconscious archetype stable. And you also spoke about Descartes' cogito and the notion of "I think, therefore I am," and I agree completely for that to be considered a truth is more of a grammatical truth than an experiential truth. Um, there really is no self. There is no conscious I that chooses. Um, and what's interesting is this is one of the central tenets of Buddhism. And from reading what Nietzsche has to say about Buddhism, he called it it's another form of slave morality. And yet it seems, I mean, when I read Nietzsche, I see so many parallels between Buddhist thinking, Buddhist philosophy, and Nietzsche's work. And this is just another area where there is a connection. The idea of there being no self, no conscious chooser, that we're totally embedded in this environment, and the environment, the unconscious, say, chooses for us. But really, there's no choice. Nothing is choosing. And it's funny to see all these parallels between Buddhism and Nietzsche, and yet Nietzsche himself thought Buddhism was just another form of slave morality, and it's something that we should outgrow. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening.